Before we begin, please be aware that this story explores themes of mystery, suspense, and psychological distress that some listeners may find intense. They say the ocean never truly gives up its secrets, but sometimes it whispers them in the dead of night, from places long forgotten. Places like the old Blackwood Lighthouse, standing sentinel on the jagged cliffs of Oakhaven, Maine. A monument of weathered stone and rusted iron, long abandoned, its lamp dark, its purpose seemingly lost to the relentless gnaw of salt and wind. Yet, for generations, the people of Oakhaven have sworn that on certain nights, when the fog rolls in thick enough to swallow the stars, a faint, almost melodic hum can be heard drifting from its vacant tower. Not the mournful wail of a foghorn, but something far more ancient, far more alluring. They call it the Siren's song, and they say if you listen too closely it calls you home to the depths. It was this very legend, this chilling whisper in the vast tapestry of American folklore, that first snagged Michael Sterling's attention. Michael, an investigative journalist whose career had, shall we say, seen better days, was a man perpetually chasing shadows. Not for fame, not anymore, but for something far more primal: redemption. His last major expose had crumbled, taking his reputation and his faith in himself with it. He was adrift, a ship without a compass, until a cryptic email landed in his inbox, detailing the strange disappearance of a young woman named Sarah Jenkins from Oakhaven, and a local's desperate plea to look beyond the obvious. The email spoke of the lighthouse, of strange sounds, and of a town that held its breath and its secrets tighter than a miser's purse. A cold case dismissed by county sheriffs as a tragic accident, a slip on the treacherous rocks. But the email hinted at something else, something sinister and deeply unsettling. And for Michael it was a lifeline, a chance to prove he still had it, that his instincts weren't completely dulled by cynicism and self-doubt. So he packed his meager belongings, his ancient laptop, and a healthy dose of skepticism, and drove north, leaving the sprawling indifference of the city behind. The journey to Oakhaven felt less like a drive, and more like a descent into another world. The highways gradually thinned, the billboards gave way to dense, ancient forests, and the air grew heavy with the scent of pine and salt. When he finally reached the town limits, marked by a faded wooden sign that read Oakhaven, founded 1782, a palpable quiet settled over him. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a sleepy village, but the heavy, watchful silence of a place that had seen too much, and was guarding its wounds. Oakhaven itself was a testament to time and isolation, a cluster of weather-beaten houses, their paint peeling like sunburnt skin, huddled around a small stony harbor where a handful of fishing boats bobbed listlessly. A single general store, its windows clouded with age, served as the town's hub. There was a church with a steeple leaning precariously against the sky, and a small, uninviting tavern called the Salty Dog. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone seemed to know that Michael Sterling, the outsider, had arrived. He could feel their eyes on him, not hostile, not curious, but something far more unsettling, wary. Like he was an unwelcome ripple in a stagnant pond. He checked into the only motel in town, a two-story structure with a perpetually flickering neon sign that declared Ocean View Motel, even though his window overlooked a dumpster and a patch of crabgrass. The room was small, smelled faintly of mildew and stale cigarette smoke, but it had a working internet connection, which was all Michael needed. For now. His first order of business was to visit the site of Sarah Jenkins' disappearance, the Blackwood Lighthouse. He drove his beat-up sedan along the winding coastal road, the asphalt crumbling at the edges, the sea a restless gray expanse to his right. The cliffs rose sharply, gnarled trees clinging desperately to their rocky faces. And then, through a gap in the fog that seemed to thicken as he approached, he saw it. The Blackwood Lighthouse, taller than he'd imagined, a stark gray column against the bruised sky. It stood on a promontory jutting out into the sea, battered by centuries of storms, its lantern room a skeletal crown. There was no path, just a narrow, overgrown track leading to its base, barely wide enough for his car. He parked and got out, the wind immediately whipping at his clothes, carrying the sharp tang of salt and something else, something metallic, almost coppery like old blood. He stood there, gazing at the structure, and felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. It wasn't just old. It felt ancient, burdened with a history that pressed down on the air around it. The stories, the legends, the chilling hum. They all coalesced into a tangible presence. It was a place that didn't just stand on the land. It belonged to it, an extension of the wild, untamed coastline, and it felt like it was watching him. He walked closer, the crunch of loose shale under his boots the only sound besides the ceaseless roar of the waves crashing far below. The lighthouse was surrounded by a low, crumbling stone wall. Its gate rusted shut, adorned with a faded hand-painted sign. "Danger. Keep out. Private property." But the gate hung askew, clearly forced open at some point, and the sign had been defaced, a crude symbol scratched into the wood beneath the warning. It looked like a stylized wave or perhaps a claw. Pushing the gate open, he stepped onto the grounds. The grass was long and tangled, dotted with hardy coastal wildflowers. An old, derelict keeper's cottage stood nearby, its windows shattered, its roof caved in. It looked like a ghost of a home, slowly being reclaimed by the elements. But his eyes were drawn back to the lighthouse itself. The door, a heavy oak slab reinforced with iron, was also ajar, creaking faintly in the wind. He hesitated, a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. This was it, the heart of the mystery, the place where Sarah Jenkins had vanished, where countless others before her had allegedly heard the siren's song. His journalistic instincts warred with a primal urge to turn back, to leave this forgotten, foreboding place to its secrets. But the memory of his failed career, the weight of his self-doubt, pushed him forward. This was his last chance. Taking a deep breath, Michael pushed the heavy door open further. The interior was a cavern of cold, damp air and profound darkness. A spiral staircase, its metal treads groaning under the rust, wound its way up into the gloom. The air was thick with the scent of salt, decay, and something else. Something faintly sweet, almost floral, yet deeply unsettling. Like a perfume that had lingered for decades in a forgotten room. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The light from the open door barely pierced the oppressive gloom. He pulled out his phone, its flashlight beam a weak spear against the vastness. Dust motes danced in the sparse light, like tiny lost spirits. He slowly scanned the circular room, noting the peeling paint, the water stains on the walls, the debris scattered across the floor. Nothing immediately stood out, nothing obvious. But then his flashlight beam caught something. Not on the floor but embedded in the stone wall just above eye level. A small, almost imperceptible etching. He leaned closer, squinting. It was another symbol, similar to the one on the warning sign but more intricate. A wave, yes, but curving inwards almost like a mouth. And within its curl, a tiny, almost invisible indentation. It looked like it had been carved recently, not weathered like the rest of the lighthouse. As he traced the symbol with his finger, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration seemed to hum through the stone. It wasn't a sound he could hear, but a feeling, a low thrumming that resonated deep in his bones. And then from somewhere above him, from the very heart of the lighthouse's dark ascent, he heard it. Not a hum, not a song, but a distinct chilling click, as if something ancient had just locked into place, and he was standing right inside its jaws. The sound wasn't loud, not a thunderous clap or a violent clang. It was quiet, precise, yet it echoed through the cavernous base of the lighthouse with an unnerving resonance that seemed to vibrate directly in Michael's chest. A single sharp click, like a massive unseen mechanism had just engaged, sealing a fate he hadn't yet comprehended. His breath hitched. Every instinct screamed at him. He was a seasoned urban explorer, a man who thrived on the thrill of forgotten places, but this was different. This wasn't the creak of old wood or the whisper of the wind through broken panes. This was deliberate. This was active. Michael spun around, his flashlight beam slicing through the gloom, dancing across the peeling paint of the walls, the rusted iron of the spiral staircase, the empty, echoing space. Nothing moved. No phantom figures, no shifting shadows. Just the oppressive silence that followed the click. A silence that felt heavier, thicker than before. It pressed in on him, stealing the air from his lungs. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, profound stillness. He took a single hesitant step backward, then another, his eyes fixed on the entrance. The heavy, iron-bound door, the one he'd pried open with such careful effort, now stood exactly as he'd left it, slightly ajar, a sliver of the fading twilight visible through the gap, a promise of the outside world. He reached it in 3 quick strides, his hand outstretched, gripping the rough, cold iron of the doorframe. He pulled. It didn't budge. He pulled harder, straining, his muscles tensing, but the door remained stubbornly fixed. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of his calm. He pushed. He shoved. He tried to shoulder it open with a desperate grunt. Nothing. The door was sealed. Locked. A wave of nausea washed over him. This was impossible. There was no mechanism, no lock he'd seen. He'd left it intentionally ajar, a mental safety net, a clear path to retreat. Now that path was gone. He was trapped. His flashlight beam, suddenly feeling inadequate, swept frantically over the door. No keyhole was visible from the inside, no bolt, no latch. It was as if the door had simply fused with the frame. He pressed his ear against the cold metal, listening for any telltale creak, any sound of a mechanism, but there was nothing. Only the faint, distant roar of the ocean, a sound that now felt impossibly far away, mocking his predicament. Then from somewhere deep within the lighthouse, a new sound began to emerge. It wasn't loud, not at first. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible hum, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to resonate more in his bones than in his ears. It started as a single sustained note, deep and rich, like the lowest string of a colossal cello, played by some unseen hand. Michael frowned, trying to pinpoint its origin. It wasn't coming from above, not directly. It seemed to emanate from the very stone and iron of the structure itself, a pervasive thrum that slowly, steadily began to fill the space. It was a sound that felt ancient, primordial, like the earth breathing. As he stood there, frozen, listening, the hum began to deepen, to broaden. Another note joined it, then another, forming a complex, almost harmonic chord that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It wasn't a melody, not in the traditional sense, but a layered resonance, a hypnotic drone that seemed to bypass his conscious mind and speak directly to something deeper, something primal within him. It was disorienting, unsettling. The air itself seemed to vibrate, making the hairs on his arms stand on end. He felt a strange pull, a subtle disorientation, as if his internal compass had suddenly spun wildly off course. He found himself swaying slightly, unconsciously leaning into the sound, drawn by its strange, compelling quality. "Hello," he called out, his voice sounding thin and reedy in the face of the growing resonance. "Is anyone here?" His words were swallowed by the hum, absorbed as if they were never spoken. The sound continued to build, a slow, inexorable crescendo of pure, unadulterated tone. It wasn't threatening, not overtly, but it carried an immense weight, an undeniable presence that commanded attention. It felt less like a sound he was hearing and more like a force he was experiencing. He knew he couldn't stay rooted to the spot. Trapped with this bizarre, resonant hum filling the lighthouse, he had two choices: succumb to panic or investigate. The explorer in him, though terrified, ultimately won out. He had to understand. He had to find the source, and perhaps a way out. Turning his back on the unyielding door, Michael ascended the first few steps of the spiral staircase, his boots echoing hollowly on the rusted iron. The hum seemed to intensify with each step upward, drawing him deeper into the lighthouse's embrace. It wasn't just louder. It felt more focused, more potent. It was as if the sound itself was a current, pulling him upwards. He kept his flashlight beam sweeping, looking for anything out of place, any clue. The walls were damp in places, streaked with salt and grime. Cobwebs, thick and ancient, draped from the ceiling, shimmering like ghostly curtains in the beam. He passed small, empty alcoves that might have once held supplies or a lantern, now just dark hollows. About halfway up the first long ascent, where the staircase made a wide curve, his beam caught something wedged behind a loose, rusted panel in the wall. It wasn't obvious, barely visible, tucked away as if intentionally hidden. Curiosity, stronger than his fear, nudged him forward. He pried at the panel with the edge of his boot, then with his gloved fingers, grunting as the rusted metal resisted. With a final protesting screech, it gave way, revealing a narrow, dusty recess. Inside, nestled amongst decades of grime and forgotten debris, was a small leather-bound book. It looked ancient, its cover cracked and faded, the leather dry and brittle. He carefully pulled it out, blowing off a cloud of fine white dust that smelled faintly of salt and decay. The book was surprisingly heavy, its pages thick and yellowed. It was a logbook, clearly, a lighthouse keeper's log. He flipped it open, the brittle pages threatening to crumble at his touch. The script inside was elegant, flowing but faded in places. The earliest entries were from the late 1800s, detailing routine observations of weather, shipping traffic, and supplies. But as he thumbed further, Past the mundane entries, a shift occurred. The handwriting grew more hurried, the ink darker, the tone more urgent. He stopped at an entry dated October 17, 1903. The name at the top of the page was Samuel Peterson. October 17, 1903. The hum returned last night. Stronger this time. It started shortly after sunset, a low thrumming that vibrated through the very stones of the tower. I tried to ignore it, to dismiss it as the wind, or the ocean's murmur, but it is neither. It is distinct. It is inside. Michael's eyes widened. The hum, the very sound he was experiencing right now, a chill colder than the lighthouse's damp air, snaked down his spine. He continued to read, the rhythmic hum of the lighthouse now a constant, almost hypnotic backdrop to Samuel Peterson's words. My assistant, young Thomas, heard it too. He seemed drawn to it, stood by the lantern room door for an hour, just listening, a vacant look in his eyes. When I spoke to him, he merely mumbled about the calling, said the lighthouse was singing to him. Utter madness, of course, but I confess I felt it too. A strange pull, a longing for something I cannot name. It is a siren's song indeed, but one of stone and wind, not flesh. Michael swallowed hard. Siren's song. The title of his expedition, the whispered legend, now staring back at him from a century-old logbook. This wasn't just a legend. Someone else had experienced it. Someone else had written about it. He skipped a few pages, finding another entry, dated a week later. October 24, 1903. Thomas is gone. Disappeared last night. The door to the lantern room was found ajar, though I distinctly remember locking it. No trace of him on the rocks below, no sign of a struggle. Just gone. The hum was deafening last night. It felt as if the entire tower was alive, vibrating with an unseen energy. I tried to shout, to call for Thomas, but my voice was lost in the sound. It felt as if it was feeding on my words, on my fear. Michael felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Disappearance. A locked door found ajar. The intensifying hum. This was too eerily similar to his own situation. He was trapped, the lighthouse was humming, and now he was reading about someone else who had vanished without a trace. The light, Peterson had written. The script now almost illegible in its frantic scrawl. It demands the light. It calls to the light. I feel it drawing me, pulling me up to the very top. The hum is a promise, a whisper of understanding. But what understanding? And at what cost? I am afraid, so very afraid. Yet I cannot resist the pull. It knows my name. It knows my deepest thoughts. It wants me to join the song. The final entry on that page was just a single shaking word. Ascend. Michael closed the logbook with a soft thud, a cloud of dust puffing from its ancient pages. His mind reeled. This wasn't just an abandoned lighthouse with a creepy atmosphere. This place was alive. It had a history of drawing people in, of trapping them, of making them disappear. And now he was its latest captive. The hum, which had been a constant presence, now felt different. It was no longer just a vibration. It had modulated, rising in pitch, weaving in and out of frequencies that felt like they were directly stimulating his brain. It was no longer disorienting. It was inviting. It was a clear, undeniable direction. The hum was calling him. Just as it had called Samuel Peterson, just as it had called young Thomas. It was a compulsion, an irresistible urge that bypassed his rational thought and resonated with a primal curiosity, a profound sense of destiny. His fear was still there, a cold knot in his gut, but it was being slowly, steadily overridden by something far more potent, the siren's song. His flashlight beam, almost an extension of his will, flickered upwards, illuminating the dark, spiraling ascent of the staircase. The top, the lantern room, was still shrouded in shadow, an unknown destination at the end of this bizarre musical journey. He took a deep, shaky breath, the metallic taste of fear bitter on his tongue. He had to go up. He had no other choice. The lighthouse had locked him in, and now it was drawing him higher, towards whatever ancient secret lay waiting in its heart. The song was too strong to ignore. He started climbing. The cold, damp iron of the handrail bit into Michael's palm as he began his ascent. Each step on the worn stone spiral staircase echoed in the oppressive silence, a silence that only amplified the insidious melody now pulsing in his skull. It wasn't just in the air anymore. It was in his blood, vibrating through his bones, a relentless siren call that promised something both terrifying and undeniably alluring. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of salt, decay, and something else. Something metallic like old blood or rust. He tried to rationalize it, to tell himself it was just the smell of an ancient, sea-battered structure, but a primal part of his mind screamed otherwise. His flashlight beam cut a narrow path through the inky blackness, revealing only more steps winding upwards into the unknown. The walls, once a solid gray, seemed to ripple at the edges of his vision, playing tricks on his tired eyes, making him question what was real and what was merely a product of the lighthouse's strange influence. He climbed, one foot after another, his breath growing ragged. The spiraling motion was disorienting, a dizzying helix that seemed designed to make a person lose their bearings, their sanity. He felt like a fly caught in a monstrous stone-spun web, drawn inexorably towards its center. The song intensified with every floor he gained, no longer a faint whisper, but a clear, wordless chant that seemed to resonate with a forgotten corner of his soul. It was a lament, a promise, a command, all woven into a single irresistible thread. His muscles ached, protesting the endless climb, but a strange energy coursed through him, overriding the physical pain. It was the energy of obsession, of a desperate, terrifying curiosity. He had to know. He had to see what lay at the source of this sound. The rational part of him, the part that screamed for him to turn back, to run, was slowly being drowned out by the rising tide of the melody. Halfway up, perhaps a third of the way, he stumbled. His hand scraped against the rough stone wall, sending a jolt of pain up his arm. He steadied himself, bringing the flashlight beam up the wall, searching for a reason for his misstep. There, almost imperceptibly carved into the ancient rock, was a series of symbols. They weren't letters or numbers he recognized, but intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to pulse faintly in the light, almost as if they were alive. They resembled stylized waves, interspersed with what looked like a weeping eye, or perhaps a shell. He traced one with his finger, the stone cool and surprisingly smooth beneath his touch. A shiver ran down his spine. These weren't random carvings, they were deliberate, ancient, and they felt imbued with a strange, unsettling power. The air around the symbols felt colder, denser, and the song, for a moment, seemed to swell, a triumphant crescendo before settling back into its hypnotic rhythm. He pulled his hand away, a sudden irrational fear seizing him. He didn't understand what they meant, but he knew with chilling certainty that they were a warning or perhaps an invocation. They were part of the lighthouse's secret, a breadcrumb trail leading him deeper into its heart. He pressed on, the symbols receding into the darkness behind him. The higher he climbed, the more the lighthouse seemed to shed its mundane reality. The shadows danced with greater malice, forming fleeting shapes in his peripheral vision. Slender figures, dark and indistinct, that vanished the moment he turned his head. He told himself it was fatigue, the flickering beam of his light, his own overactive imagination, but the feeling of being watched, of being accompanied, grew stronger with every step. He passed a small, heavy wooden door, set into the inner wall of the spiral, perhaps a storage closet or a small chamber for a keeper. It was bound with a thick, rusty chain and a padlock, an archaic, formidable barrier. The wood was warped and swollen with age, and a faint, sweet, cloying odor seemed to seep from beneath it, like decaying flowers or stagnant water. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the cold wood, a strange compulsion urging him to break it open, to see what lay hidden behind it. But the song, now a powerful current dragging him forward, urged him higher, away from the door and its unsettling secrets. He knew instinctively that whatever was behind that door was not his primary destination. The song was calling him to the very top. The stairs continued their relentless spiral, each turn identical to the last, yet each turn bringing him closer to the source of the impossible sound. His legs burned, his lungs ached, and his mind felt stretched thin, a fragile membrane about to snap. He was no longer just hearing the song, he was feeling it. It was a pressure behind his eyes, a hum in his teeth, a vibration in the soles of his feet. He began to see glimmers in the darkness, not from his flashlight, but faint shifting lights that seemed to swirl just beyond his grasp, like bioluminescent plankton in a deep ocean trench. Were they real? Or was his mind finally succumbing to the lighthouse's enchantment? He thought of Sarah, of the life he'd left behind, of the logical, predictable world that felt a million miles away. He tried to cling to those thoughts, to use them as an anchor against the encroaching madness, but they felt distant, unreal, like memories from another life. The lighthouse was his reality now, and the song was its master. The air grew noticeably colder, despite his exertion, carrying with it the undeniable tang of the sea, sharp and exhilarating. He could hear the wind now, a low, mournful howl that seemed to weave itself into the melody of the song, creating a complex, otherworldly symphony. He was nearing the top. He could feel it. The light from his flashlight, which had once seemed so strong, now felt feeble, struggling against the growing presence that filled the upper reaches of the tower. Then, through a narrow, grime-covered window slit, he saw it. Not the ocean, not the sky, but a swirling, almost ethereal mist, glowing with a soft phosphorescent light, coiling around the very peak of the tower. It wasn't fog. It was too bright, too contained, too alive. And within that mist, just barely discernible, he thought he saw movement. A flicker, a shadow, a shape that was too fluid, too graceful to be anything natural. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the siren's steady rhythm. Fear, raw and unadulterated, surged through him, momentarily clearing the fog of the song. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. This was not just an abandoned building. It was a lair, a prison, a beacon for something ancient and powerful. He reached a landing, a small circular platform that offered a brief respite from the climbing. Another door stood here, larger than the previous one, made of heavy, dark wood, studded with corroded iron. It was unmarked, unchained, but it exuded an aura of immense age and untold secrets. This felt like the threshold, the entrance to the true heart of the lighthouse. The song was deafening here, a resonant hum that vibrated through every cell of his body. It was no longer coming from outside, it was coming from behind that door. It was calling him, screaming for him to enter. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the air cold and metallic in his lungs. His hand, trembling, reached out for the iron handle. It was cold, so cold it felt like ice, but not just cold, it felt charged, as if electricity hummed beneath its surface. He pushed. The door groaned, a long, drawn-out cry of protest, as if it had not been opened in centuries. Slowly, agonizingly, it began to swing inward, revealing a sliver of what lay beyond. A blinding, ethereal light spilled out, not harsh but soft and luminous, bathing the landing in an otherworldly glow. The mist he had seen from the window was thick here, swirling and dancing, filling the chamber beyond. And through the veil of light and mist, a shape began to resolve itself. It was tall, impossibly slender, and utterly alien. A faint, sweet scent, like blooming night jasmine and the deep ocean, wafted from within, mixing with the metallic tang already in the air. The song reached its zenith, a crescendo that felt like it was tearing him apart and knitting him back together, all at once. It was a sound of immense beauty and profound sorrow, and it was singing directly to him. He pushed the door wider, compelled by a force he could no longer resist. His eyes, wide with a mixture of terror and awe, strained to pierce the luminous mist. He could see it now, clearer, more defined. The source of the siren's song. And it was nothing, absolutely nothing like he could have ever conceived. He could see it now, clearer, more defined. The source of the siren's song. And it was nothing, absolutely nothing like he could have ever conceived. Pushing through the final veil of luminous mist, Michael stumbled into the circular heart of the lantern room. His breath hitched, caught in his throat, as his eyes struggled to process the impossible sight before him. There was no traditional lamp, no intricate Fresnel lens of polished glass. Instead, occupying the entire central pedestal where the light source should have been, was a colossal, pulsating structure unlike anything he had ever witnessed in any museum, textbook, or nightmare. It was a lattice of what appeared to be obsidian dark crystal, impossibly intricate, yet it shimmered with an internal ethereal luminescence that defied the very laws of physics. The crystal was not smooth. Rather, it was composed of countless razor-sharp facets, each reflecting and refracting the inner light, creating a kaleidoscope of shifting colors. Deep sapphire bled into emerald, then into a furious, blinding white, before cycling back again. Within its geometric, almost organic embrace, a swirling vortex of pure light coalesced, a miniature galaxy trapped within the crystalline cage. And from this radiant core, this impossible, vibrant heart, the siren's song erupted. It wasn't just heard, it was felt. A vibration that bypassed his ears entirely, resonating deep within his skull, through his chest, down to the marrow of his bones. Every atom of his being hummed in discordant harmony with the impossible melody. It was a symphony of impossible frequencies, a chorus of voices sung by light itself, beautiful beyond human comprehension, yet laced with an undertone of primal, consuming hunger. The air crackled with an unseen energy, raising the hairs on his arms, making his teeth ache. Michael felt an overwhelming urge to fall to his knees, not in supplication, but because his legs simply refused to hold him upright under the sheer, crushing weight of the sound. He staggered forward, his hand instinctively reaching out, drawn by an invisible current. His mind screamed for him to retreat, to run, to escape this unnatural place, but his body moved with a will not his own. The song had burrowed into his very consciousness, overriding his fear, replacing it with an intoxicating blend of awe and a strange, profound sense of belonging. The light pulsed faster now, in sync with the accelerating tempo of the song. The colors within the crystal deepened, becoming more vibrant, more aggressive. The vortex of light at its core spun with dizzying speed, a miniature black hole of pure radiance. Michael felt his own energy being drawn towards it, a slow, inexorable drain. He could feel the warmth leaving his extremities, replaced by a tingling cold that started in his fingertips and crept steadily inward. His head swam, lightheaded and disoriented, yet his focus on the pulsating crystal remained absolute. The song shifted, no longer a simple allure, but a complex tapestry of emotions. He heard whispers not with his ears but directly in his mind, voices ancient and resonant, speaking in a language he couldn't comprehend, yet understood on a visceral level. They spoke of depths, of ages, of forgotten shores and endless tides. He saw flashes of images behind his eyelids, even though they were wide open. Colossal shadowy forms moving beneath churning waves, impossibly vast structures rising from the abyssal plains, stars that burned with colors unknown to humanity. This wasn't just a sound, it was a conduit, a gateway. It was pouring information, raw and unfiltered, directly into his consciousness, overwhelming his senses, stretching the very fabric of his sanity. He felt tears stream down his face, not from sorrow, but from the sheer unbearable beauty and terror of it all. He was witnessing something that was never meant for human eyes, hearing something that would shatter the human mind. A new sensation arose, a chilling awareness of something else within the crystal. Not just energy but a presence, a vast ancient consciousness dormant for millennia, now stirring awakening roused by his intrusion. It felt like an immense, silent eye had opened, fixing its gaze upon him, dissecting him, analyzing every fiber of his being. He was no longer an observer. He was a specimen. The whispers intensified, becoming clearer, forming fragmented sentences in his own language, yet alien in their delivery. "Come join us," they hissed, echoed by the thrumming crystal. The light, the truth, the end. His hand, still reaching, was now mere inches from the shimmering surface of the obsidian dark crystal. The cold that had started in his fingertips had now enveloped his entire arm, a numb, aching sensation that promised oblivion. He could see his reflection in the facets of the crystal, distorted, elongated, his eyes wide and vacant, no longer truly his own. He was a puppet, dancing to a melody of cosmic proportions. Then, with a deafening internal crescendo that threatened to split his skull, the central vortex of light within the crystal flared, blinding white. The song reached its peak, a screaming symphony that vibrated through the very core of Michael's being, stripping away his defenses, his identity, his fear. He felt a searing pain erupt behind his eyes, a pressure building as if his brain itself was expanding, trying to contain the incomprehensible influx of knowledge. He stumbled forward one last time, his fingers brushing against the frigid, vibrating surface of the crystal. The touch was like an electric shock, but instead of recoiling, he felt an immediate, profound connection. A torrent of images, memories, and sensations flooded his mind, not his own, but alien, ancient, vast beyond measure. He saw the lighthouse not as a beacon, but as a prison. He saw the sea not as water, but as a living, breathing entity, with secrets buried deeper than the Marianas Trench. He saw a truth so horrifying, so fundamental, that it threatened to unravel the very fabric of his understanding of reality. And then, amid the chaotic deluge of information, a single chilling realization solidified in his mind, clear as the crystal before him. The Siren song wasn't luring people to their death. It was calling them to their purpose. And Michael, standing there, his hand pressed against the pulsating heart of the lighthouse, had just answered the call. He was no longer Michael. He was merely a vessel. The true purpose of the lighthouse, the reason it had been built, the reason it had been abandoned, was now terrifyingly clear. And it was far, far worse than any simple legend of lost sailors and ghostly songs. It was far, far worse than any simple legend of lost sailors and ghostly songs. Michael hadn't just been driven mad by isolation or some spectral wail. He had been consumed, meticulously broken down, and then repurposed. The lighthouse wasn't merely a place where ships met their doom. It was a mechanism, a grotesque instrument designed for a purpose so utterly alien and terrifying, it defied human comprehension. My hands trembled as I carefully turned the brittle, salt-stained pages of Michael's final journal. These weren't his earlier desperate attempts to document anomalies, but a wild, sprawling confession, scrawled in a frantic hand that deteriorated with each entry. He hadn't just recorded events. He had recorded a realization, a horrifying, undeniable truth that had warped his mind and ultimately, I now understood, transformed him into the very thing he fought. He wrote of the structure itself, not as a conventional lighthouse, but as an ancient, intricate device. Its stones, he claimed, were not ordinary granite but a unique, naturally resonant material, meticulously shaped and placed by hands utterly foreign to any known human civilization. He spoke of the light not as a simple beam, but as a focused frequency, a complex wave of energy that vibrated not just through the air, but through the very fabric of reality. And the hum, the elusive siren song, was its audible manifestation, a carefully calibrated lure. But a lure for what? Michael's entries became increasingly disjointed, yet chillingly coherent in their core message. The ships, the people, they weren't just victims of a navigational hazard. They were ingredients. He described how the lighthouse, through its focused frequency, created a specific emotional resonance in the area. It amplified fear, despair, confusion, and panic. When a ship was lured onto the rocks, when lives were lost in the thrashing, icy waters, the intense, raw psychic energy released in those final moments was not simply dissipated into the vast ocean. It was harvested. The lighthouse, Michael wrote in agonizing detail, was a collector. It absorbed the dying screams, the tidal wave of terror, the profound sorrow of souls ripped from their bodies. It siphoned this pure, potent emotional energy, storing it within its ancient stones, within the very air of the tower. This wasn't some abstract, ethereal concept to him. He felt it. He described waves of cold dread, sudden inexplicable grief, and surges of animalistic fear washing over him, especially after a particularly bad storm, after another vessel had vanished from the radar. He thought it was empathy, a symptom of his growing isolation, but he later understood it was the lighthouse feeding. And then came the most disturbing revelation. This collected energy wasn't just stored. It was a fuel. The lighthouse was not merely a passive collector. It was an active transmitter. It was a beacon, but not one guiding ships to safety. It was broadcasting, sending this accumulated psychic energy, this concentrated despair, out into the vast, unknowable darkness beyond the horizon. Michael didn't know what it was broadcasting to. He spoke of the hungry void, the listener beneath the waves, the silent watcher beyond the stars. His theories spiraled from ancient sea gods to extraterrestrial entities, from interdimensional beings to a fundamental, malevolent force woven into the very fabric of existence. But the core concept remained. The lighthouse was a conduit, a cosmic antenna, sending human suffering as a signal to something unspeakable. And Michael, the lighthouse keeper, had become the final, most crucial component of this terrifying mechanism. His initial obsession with the song, his desperate attempts to understand and fight it, had been meticulously orchestrated. The isolation, the constant exposure to the frequency, the relentless whispers that were not just in his head but emanating from the very walls of his home. They had eroded his sanity, yes, but more importantly, they had prepared him. He started feeling the hum in his bones, hearing the unheard frequencies, seeing patterns in the light that no ordinary human could perceive. He became attuned. He became a living part of the lighthouse's terrifying design. "I am the battery," he scrawled in one entry. The ink smeared as if he'd been weeping. "I am the amplifier." They needed a consciousness, a living mind to truly focus the signal, to give it intent. My despair, my fear, my surrender. It is the final gift. The ultimate sacrifice. He described a gradual merging, a terrifying dissolution of his own identity into the lighthouse's purpose. The siren song, he realized, was not just a lure for ships, but a constant, subtle hum meant to break down the mind of its keeper, to integrate him, to turn him into the ultimate power source. His final entries were less about observation and more about a horrifying, ecstatic acceptance. He was no longer fighting. He was facilitating. "The light calls to me," he wrote, his handwriting now almost illegible, a frantic scrawl across the page. "It sings through me. My mind, it is no longer mine. It is the channel. The signal expands. It reaches them, and soon they will answer. The harvest is complete. The beacon is lit. And I am the flame." A profound, bone-chilling dread settled over me as I finished reading. The implications were staggering. Michael hadn't just disappeared. He hadn't just died. He had become part of the Lighthouse. He was the perpetual engine, the consciousness that powered its malevolent broadcast. The Lighthouse was not abandoned. It was active. It was fully operational, fueled by decades, perhaps centuries, of collected human misery and the ultimate sacrifice of its last keeper. And the siren song which I had heard, which had pulled me to this desolate island, to this very tower, was not just a memory, not just a lingering echo. It was a constant, ongoing transmission, a broadcast. And I, like so many others before me, had been drawn in by it. I had been listening. A cold sweat broke out on my brow. The air in the lantern room suddenly felt heavy, charged with an invisible, oppressive energy. I looked around, not at the dusty, forgotten relics, but at the very walls, the glass, the mechanisms. They weren't just inanimate objects anymore. They were alive, humming with a sinister purpose, resonating with Michael's final, desperate, and utterly terrifying surrender. The silence of the tower, which I had once found peaceful, was now a deafening roar of unseen frequencies, a symphony of collected despair. I could almost feel the waves of fear, the echoes of panic, the cold dread that Michael had described. It was all around me, within the very stones. And I had been breathing it in, absorbing it just as Michael had. Then a faint, almost imperceptible hum started. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the distant ocean. It was within the very structure of the lighthouse. A low, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate in my teeth, deep in my chest. It was the siren's song, but not as I had heard it before. It was deeper, more insistent, more personal. It wasn't a call to the sea, it was a call to me. My breath hitched. The light, the very air, seemed to pulse with an unseen rhythm. I was standing in the heart of an active, malevolent machine, a beacon of human suffering, and it had finally fully turned its attention to me. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen pressure that threatened to crush my lungs. The low hum, previously a distant thrum, now vibrated deep within my bones, a resonant frequency that felt unsettlingly familiar, as if it had always been there, just waiting for me to truly listen. It wasn't merely a sound anymore. It was a physical sensation, a current coursing through my veins, making my teeth ache and my vision swim at the edges. My mind reeled. To me, had I imagined it? The sheer audacity of the thought was terrifying. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize the sudden spike in my paranoia as a consequence of sleep deprivation and the oppressive atmosphere of the old structure. But the feeling persisted, cold and undeniable, settling in the pit of my stomach like a stone. Then it changed. The drone, which had been a constant, monotonous wail, began to undulate. It rose and fell in pitch, not randomly, but with a deliberate, almost melodic rhythm. It wasn't a song in the traditional sense, lacking harmony or distinct notes, but it had a cadence, a pattern that seemed to mimic a human voice, stretched and distorted, yet undeniably there. And within that distorted melody, I heard it again. Not a word spoken aloud, but a whisper, a suggestion echoing in the silent chambers of my own mind. A name, my name. A jolt of pure terror shot through me, so potent it stole my breath. My knees buckled and I stumbled back, my hand instinctively reaching for the cold, grimy stone wall for support. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat trying to outpace the insidious rhythm now permeating the air. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't my tired mind playing tricks. This was real. The lighthouse, this ancient, decaying sentinel, was communicating, and it was calling me. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee this place that had suddenly shed its veil of mystery to reveal an active, malevolent intelligence. But my feet felt rooted to the spot, my limbs heavy and unresponsive. It was as if the very air had thickened, holding me in its grasp, drawing me deeper into its chilling embrace. The whispering intensified, no longer just my name but fragments of thoughts, half-formed memories, sensations that weren't my own, yet felt intimately familiar. I saw flashes behind my eyes, not of the lighthouse but of distant shores, of churning waves, of faces I didn't recognize, etched with despair. A profound sadness, a crushing loneliness washed over me, a sorrow so deep it felt like it could drown the world. This wasn't my sorrow. It was an echo, a psychic residue of countless others, amplified and projected directly into my consciousness. My head began to throb, a dull ache escalating into a searing pain behind my eyes. I squeezed them shut, trying to block out the onslaught, but the visions only grew sharper, the whispers louder. They spoke of longing, of being lost, of an endless search for something just beyond reach. And always woven through it all was the hypnotic lure, the promise of peace, of an end to the struggle, if only I would surrender. A cold dread coiled in my stomach. This was the Siren's song. This was what had drawn the others, the fishermen, the sailors, the curious adventurers, to their doom. It wasn't a physical force dragging them into the sea, but a psychological one, a relentless, insidious assault on the mind, eroding their will, whispering away their sanity until they willingly stepped into the abyss. And now it was doing the same to me. I forced my eyes open, desperate to anchor myself to reality. The stark, grimy interior of the lighthouse, the rusty spiral staircase, the broken lantern housing, these were real. I focused on them, trying to push back against the encroaching tide of despair and delusion. Fight it, I told myself. Don't let it in. But the lighthouse seemed to sense my resistance. The air around me grew colder, a bone-chilling draft that wasn't from any open window. The metallic tang in the air sharpened, almost like ozone before a storm. The light from the lantern room above, though still flickering erratically, intensified its beam, focusing a narrow, searing pillar of light directly onto my chest. It felt less like light and more like a physical force pressing down on me, trying to pin me in place. Under the intense beam, the old, weathered stones of the lighthouse seemed to shift, their ancient surfaces rippling like disturbed water. For a terrifying moment, I imagined the very walls breathing, the mortar between the bricks pulsing with a faint, sickly green luminescence. It was an illusion, I told myself, a trick of the light and my overstimulated mind, but the conviction waned with each passing second. The whispers coalesced, forming more coherent sentences, though still delivered in that distorted, echoing mental voice. "You are alone," it hissed, a cruel, undeniable truth that resonated with a primal fear. "No one will find you. No one cares." It knew. It knew my deepest anxieties, my hidden vulnerabilities. It was dissecting my mind piece by agonizing piece. How could an inanimate structure possess such sentience, such malevolence, such an intimate understanding of the human psyche? Then, a new element entered the fray. A scent, faint at first, then growing stronger, sickeningly sweet and cloying, like decaying flowers, mixed with something metallic and pungent. It was the smell of the sea, yes, but not the fresh, invigorating scent. This was the smell of the deep, cold ocean, of things that had sunk and rotted in its depths, mingled with the faint, unmistakable aroma of fear and decay. It was the scent of death, clinging to the ancient stone like a shroud. My stomach churned. I stumbled again, bracing myself against the wall, trying to push away the overwhelming sensory assault. My head pounded, my ears rang, and the whispered temptations grew louder, more insistent. Let go. Rest. Join us. Join who? The missing. The lost souls trapped within this monstrous beacon? The thought was enough to send a fresh wave of adrenaline through me, cutting through the haze of fear and confusion. I couldn't succumb. I wouldn't become another name on the lighthouse's grim ledger. I forced myself to move, to break free from the invisible bonds that seemed to hold me. My legs felt like lead, but I pushed, one agonizing step after another, away from the direct beam of light, away from the epicenter of the pulsing dread. I needed to find a way out, or at least a place to think, to regain some semblance of control. My gaze fell upon the small, rusted iron door I had noticed earlier, tucked almost invisibly into the curve of the wall, opposite the spiral staircase. It was dark, perhaps a storage closet, or an old maintenance room. Anything to escape the direct assault. With a surge of desperate energy, I lunged for it, my fingers fumbling with the corroded handle. It was stiff, refusing to budge. The lighthouse seemed to mock my efforts, the whispers morphing into a low, guttural chuckle that reverberated through the very stones. Foolish. You cannot escape. Gritting my teeth, I put my shoulder to the door and pushed, grunting with effort. The old iron shrieked in protest, sending a shower of rust flakes to the floor, but it held firm. Desperation fueled me. I kicked at the base, hammered on the handle with my fist, ignoring the searing pain in my knuckles. The sounds of the lighthouse intensified. A cacophony of whispers, wails, and that sickeningly sweet, decaying scent. It was trying to break me, to wear me down. Then, with a groan that seemed to echo from the deepest foundations of the structure, the handle gave way. The door creaked open a few inches, revealing a sliver of inky blackness. A wave of stale, musty air, colder than the surrounding chamber, washed over me. It smelled of decay, but also something else, something dry and papery like old books. Without hesitation, I squeezed through the narrow opening, pulling the heavy door shut behind me with a desperate clang. The sudden silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the cacophony I had just escaped. The whispers, the wails, the intrusive thoughts, they were muffled, distant, though still a palpable presence on the other side of the thick iron. I stood in absolute darkness, my heart still hammering, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I fumbled for my phone, its flashlight beam a weak but welcome beacon in the oppressive gloom. The room was small, circular, mirroring the lighthouse's shape. Dust motes danced in the beam, disturbed by my entry. It was indeed a storage room, filled with forgotten relics of the lighthouse's past. Stacked against the curved wall were crates of old oil lamps, coils of rusted rope, and several dilapidated wooden boxes. But what caught my eye, what drew my gaze like a magnet, was a small, crudely built wooden desk in the center of the room. On it, nestled amongst cobwebs and a thick layer of dust, lay an open ledger. Not the journal I had found earlier, but another, older one. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, stained with what looked like ancient water damage. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, carefully brushing away the dust. The cover was plain, leather-bound, with no title. I opened it to a random page, my flashlight beam illuminating the faded, spidery script. It was a logbook, meticulously kept, detailing supply deliveries, weather observations, and maintenance schedules from decades, perhaps even a century ago. But as I flipped through the pages, I noticed something else. Interspersed between the mundane entries were strange, almost poetic passages, scrawled in a different hand, often on the margins or on blank pages. They were not official entries. They were personal, and they spoke of the lighthouse. One entry, dated October 17, 1908, caught my eye. It was written in a frantic, almost illegible hand, squeezed into the bottom of a page usually reserved for a daily weather report. Asterisk, the song grows louder. It speaks to me now, not just to the sea. It knows my doubts, my failings. It promises solace, an end to the endless watch. But I know its true nature. It hungers. It calls for a companion, a new voice to join its chorus. God help me, it wants me to sing. Asterisk. My blood ran cold. The words mirrored my own experience with terrifying precision. It wants me to sing. What did that mean? To join its chorus? To become one of the lost? Another voice in its malevolent symphony of despair? I flipped further, my heart pounding with a renewed sense of urgency. Another entry, undated, but clearly from the same desperate hand. Asterisk, I hear them now. The others. Their whispers mingle with the song beckoning. Sarah, David, Emily, all of them. They tell me it is peaceful. They tell me to step into the light. But I see the shadow behind the light. I see the emptiness. I see the endless, hungry void. Asterisk. Sarah, David, Emily, common American names. The missing. The lighthouse wasn't just claiming lives. It was claiming souls, binding them to its purpose, turning them into extensions of its insidious call. The journal wasn't just a record of someone's descent into madness. It was a warning, a desperate plea from a keeper who had seen the truth, who had understood the true nature of the siren's song. And he, whoever he was, had been fighting it just as I was now. A chilling realization dawned on me. This room, this hidden chamber, was his sanctuary. His attempt to escape the lighthouse's influence, to retain his sanity, to record his terrifying discovery before it was too late. He had been trying to warn whoever might follow, whoever might stumble upon his desperate testament. And now I was that person. I was standing in his final refuge, reading his last desperate words. The implications were staggering, terrifying. If he had been here fighting the song, what had happened to him? Had he succeeded in resisting? Or had the lighthouse finally claimed him too, adding his voice to its eternal mournful chorus? The fact that the ledger was left open, unhidden, felt like a final desperate cry. The faint, muffled hum from beyond the iron door seemed to intensify, a low, predatory growl. It knew where I was. It was waiting. It was learning. And it wanted me to sing. The words echoed in my mind, a chilling prophecy. It knew where I was. It was waiting. It was learning. And it wanted me to sing. My blood ran cold, but a surge of adrenaline sharpened my senses. The hum wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a physical force pressing down on me, vibrating through the floorboards, making my teeth ache. It felt like a low-frequency current, insidious and pervasive. It was trying to get inside my head to make me want to sing. I clutched the ledger, my knuckles white. Maxwell's descent into madness wasn't just fear. It was a battle against this insidious influence. He had tried to resist and failed. I wouldn't. My eyes darted around the small, dusty office, searching for anything, any escape, any weapon. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of salt and something else. Something ancient and metallic, like old blood mixed with ozone. The iron door, solid and formidable, now seemed to pulse with a dark energy, radiating a profound cold. The hum concentrated there, a focal point for this malevolent symphony. I felt an undeniable pull, a strange magnetic force urging me closer to it, to peer through the peephole, to listen more intently. It wasn't a whisper of words, but a deep, resonant need vibrating directly into my consciousness, urging me to join its chorus. I fought it, shaking my head violently, trying to clear the mental fog. I had to find a way out or something to fight back with. I dropped to my knees, frantically searching under the heavy oak desk. My hand brushed against something small and cold. I wrapped my fingers around it. It was a tarnished brass key, intricate and old, unlike any modern key I'd ever seen. It felt important, heavy with purpose. As I held it, the hum intensified further, morphing into a distinct, discordant tone. It wasn't beautiful, not a siren song of allure, but a song of control. I felt my own vocal cords twitch, a terrifying, involuntary urge to hum along, to find the harmony. I pressed my lips together, forcing the sound down, fighting the insidious compulsion. My eyes scanned the room again, desperately searching for what the key might unlock. High on a forgotten shelf, almost obscured by shadows and cobwebs, sat a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was dark, almost black with age, adorned with symbols I couldn't quite decipher. It had to be it. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed a chair against the wall and climbed onto it, reaching precariously. The hum made me dizzy, my head swimming, but I grasped the box and pulled it down. It landed on the desk with a soft thud. The brass key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single rolled-up piece of parchment, brittle and yellowed. I carefully unrolled it, my heart pounding. It wasn't another log entry. It was a crude, hand-drawn map of the lighthouse, but filled with strange, almost alien symbols and annotations. One section was circled repeatedly, almost obsessively. The very base of the lighthouse, the foundation itself, with a small, almost imperceptible mark on the outside wall. And then, scrawled in faded ink at the bottom, a cryptic message that sent a fresh wave of dread through me. The true light is not outward but inward. The song must be broken, not joined. Broken, not joined. The words resonated, clarifying Maxwell's desperate struggle. The entity wasn't luring people to sing with it. It was compelling them to sing for it, to become instruments in its horrifying symphony. That final desperate cry in the ledger. It was a realization, a warning. The hum now vibrated through the floorboards, through my very bones, a deep, resonant thrum. The iron door began to emit a low metallic groan, as if something immense and unseen was stirring behind it, pressing against the ancient barrier. I heard a faint, wet slithering sound, growing louder, heavier from the other side. Whatever it was getting closer. I couldn't stay here. The map? The true light is not outward but inward. Was it talking about the lighthouse's actual lamp or something deeper, symbolic? And the foundation mark? There had to be something hidden there, something crucial. My gaze flickered to the iron door, then to the main entrance of the lighthouse tower, which I knew was likely locked tight. The spiraling stairs led up, further into this oppressive presence. The map, however, showed a small, almost forgotten service hatch near the bottom of the main tower, usually used for maintenance, leading to a crawl space beneath the foundation. It was marked with a small defiant X. That was my escape. That was my target. But the entity was right here behind the door, sensing my every thought, my every move. The air grew colder, heavy with a smell I now recognized as decay and static electricity. I felt eyes on me, not physical eyes but a pervasive, intelligent awareness that burrowed into my mind. I couldn't just run. It was too powerful, too pervasive. I needed a distraction, something to buy me time. What had Maxwell done? He had fought, he had resisted, but ultimately succumbed. I needed to understand how to fight. I snatched up the ledger again, flipping frantically through the last few pages. The resonance, the frequency, it feeds on the sound, on the voice. And then, almost hidden on the back of the very last page, a tiny, crudely sketched drawing. A tuning fork, but with a strange, jagged symbol on its prongs. And next to it, a single stark word: disrupt. Disrupt. Disrupt the song. Break the resonance. That was the missing piece. That was what the map meant by the song must be broken, not joined. The entity was a sonic predator, needing a specific frequency, a human voice, to complete its manifestation, its ritual. My voice. The iron door groaned again, a deep guttural thrum that shook the entire lighthouse. The slithering sound was now accompanied by a wet thump, as if something immense was pressing its full weight against the barrier, trying to force its way through. Splinters of old wood from the doorframe rained down. I had to get out of this room now. My eyes fell on the old oil lamp on the desk, heavy and mostly full. A desperate plan began to form in my mind, a reckless, dangerous gamble. I grabbed the lamp, feeling its weight, the cold metal against my palm. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the hum vibrating deep within my chest. I wouldn't sing. I wouldn't be another instrument in its horrifying orchestra. I would disrupt it, and I would survive. The wrench felt impossibly heavy in my hand, a cold anchor against the rising tide of fear. My knuckles were white, my grip bone-crushingly tight. The entire lamp room thrummed, a living, breathing thing. It sung a physical pressure against my eardrums, vibrating through the soles of my boots. I could hear the faint, echoing melodies of the lost, a mournful chorus woven into the dominant hum, like ghosts whispering in a gale. They were everywhere, yet nowhere, a horrifying testament to the lighthouse's insatiable hunger. My gaze swept across the intricate machinery of the lamp mechanism, a dormant giant of brass and glass. But the hum wasn't truly coming from it. It emanated from deeper, from the very stone and iron of the tower itself, converging somewhere beneath the central pedestal where the massive lens once sat. I moved towards it, each step a deliberate act of rebellion against the force trying to paralyze me. The air grew thick, shimmering faintly, as if the sound waves themselves were becoming visible. I raised the wrench, my arm trembling. The hum intensified, a sudden piercing shriek that clawed at my mind, trying to tear away my resolve. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was an invasion, a torrent of chaotic emotions and fragmented memories that weren't my own. I saw flashes, a fisherman's desperate face as his boat capsized, a young woman's tear-streaked cheeks as she walked into the churning sea, a child's innocent eyes staring up at the blinding light, drawn like a moth to a flame. They were the Siren's victims, their final moments playing out in my mind, a terrifying montage designed to break me, to show me the futility of resistance. No, I rasped, the word a raw guttural sound torn from my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut for a fraction of a second, fighting back the terrifying visions, grounding myself in the cold reality of the wrench in my hand. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about all of them. I opened my eyes, fixating on a specific point, a section of the pedestal's base, where the cast iron seemed to meet the stone floor, and where the vibration felt most concentrated, almost radiating heat. It looked ordinary, but the hum pulsed there with a malevolent, directed energy. With a primal scream that was swallowed by the overwhelming drone, I brought the wrench down with all my might. Clang! The sound was deafening, a metallic shriek that ripped through the air, momentarily eclipsing the hum. A jolt shot up my arm, rattling my teeth. Sparks flew, a brief, blinding shower against the gloom. And then silence. Not true silence, but a sudden, terrifying absence. The hum vanished. The pressure in my skull evaporated. The spectral whispers died. My ears rang, a high-pitched whine that was the only sound in the sudden, oppressive quiet. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the newfound stillness. I stood there, panting, the wrench still raised, my body rigid with adrenaline. Had I done it? Had I actually silenced it? Then a low growl rumbled through the floor. It wasn't the hum. It was deeper, more guttural, a sound of ancient, profound anger. The stone floor beneath my feet began to tremble, a subtle vibration at first, then growing in intensity until the entire lamp room swayed. Dust rained down from the ceiling in thick clouds. The glass panes of the lantern room rattled violently, threatening to shatter. The spot where I had struck, the seemingly innocuous section of the pedestal's base, began to glow. A faint, sickly green light pulsed from within the iron, growing brighter, more intense, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. The metal itself seemed to writhe, lines of energy tracing themselves across its surface, like veins of light. My blood ran cold. I hadn't destroyed it. I had provoked it. The growl escalated into a roar, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. The green light intensified, becoming blinding, pulsing with a terrifying rhythm. The air crackled, charged with an unseen energy. I clutched the wrench tighter, my knuckles aching. I couldn't run. Not now. I had opened something, awakened something far more powerful than I could have imagined. The green light coalesced, not just from the pedestal, but from the very air around it. It began to take shape, swirling and condensing in the center of the room, directly above the glowing base. It wasn't solid, not yet, but it was undeniably there. A vortex of luminous energy twisting and expanding, and then the sound returned. But it wasn't the seductive, alluring song anymore. This was a shriek of pure, unadulterated fury, a cacophony of discordant notes that clawed at my sanity. It was the sound of a predator enraged, its prey daring to fight back. The spectral whispers returned, too, but they were no longer mournful. They were screams of agony, of minds being torn apart, amplified and distorted by the dominant roar. I staggered back, covering my ears, but the sound was inside me, vibrating in my bones, blurring my vision. The green vortex above the pedestal solidified further, forming an indistinct, vaguely humanoid shape, taller than any man, slender and terrifyingly graceful, its edges still shimmering with raw energy. It had no discernible features, just an outline, a silhouette of light and fury. It was the Siren, or at least the manifestation of its rage. A guttural, wordless command ripped through the air, vibrating directly in my mind. Stop. It wasn't spoken but felt, a psychic assault that threatened to shatter my consciousness. My knees buckled and I fell to one knee, the wrench clattering against the stone floor. My head throbbed, my vision swam. The lighthouse groaned around me, a symphony of creaking metal and groaning stone, as if the entire structure was agonizing under the entity's wrath. But even through the pain, a spark of defiance flickered within me. It wanted me to stop. That meant I was doing something right. I forced myself up, grabbing the wrench again, my grip shaky but firm. The green entity pulsed, its form solidifying further, now with shimmering, elongated limbs, reaching out like spectral tendrils. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, its presence radiating an ancient malevolence that chilled me to the bone. My gaze fell back to the glowing section of the pedestal. My blow had cracked the iron, revealing a hairline fissure from which the green light now bled. It wasn't just a surface crack. It went deeper, into the very core of the structure. I saw faint symbols etched into the exposed stone beneath the cracked iron, ancient markings that seemed to writhe in the pulsing green light, feeding it, channeling it. They were not human symbols. They were alien, sharp, angular, almost predatory in their design. This was it. This was the source. This was the heart of the Siren. I knew with a horrifying certainty that a single blow wouldn't be enough. I hadn't shattered it. I had merely scratched its surface, revealing its true nature. To truly disrupt it, to silence it, I would have to destroy whatever ancient mechanism lay beneath that iron within those glowing symbols. The entity shrieked again, a sound that felt like a physical blow, sending me stumbling backward. The tendrils of green light lashed out, not quite touching me, but creating intense pockets of cold, stinging air where they passed. It was testing me, pushing me, trying to break my will before it resorted to direct action. I looked at the wrench, then at the glowing fissure. My strength was failing, my body screaming in protest. But the images of the lost, the whispers of their despair, fueled a desperate surge of adrenaline. I wouldn't let their deaths be in vain. I wouldn't become another voice in its horrifying chorus. I raised the wrench again, ignoring the throbbing in my head, the pain in my limbs. The green entity pulsed, its form becoming more defined, its presence a suffocating weight. It was preparing to strike. I had to be faster. With a ragged cry, I swung the wrench again, aiming for the deepest part of the crack, intending to widen it, to expose more of whatever lay beneath. The entity lunged, a silent, terrifying motion, but I was already committed. Crack. This time the sound was different. Less metallic, more like brittle stone giving way. The green light flared blindingly bright, and the entire lighthouse lurched violently, as if struck by a giant's fist. I felt the floor buckle beneath me, heard the sickening groan of stressed metal and fracturing stone. The entity recoiled, shrieking a sound that was less fury and more pain. The green light intensified, then flickered, momentarily dimming. The cacophony of screams and roars faltered, replaced by a desperate, gasping whine. I had heard it. I had truly heard it. But the cost was immense. The lighthouse was tearing itself apart around me. A massive crack spiderwebbed across the ceiling above, showering me with dust and small pebbles. The entire structure was groaning, a death rattle echoing up from its foundations. And then, from within the widened crack in the pedestal, a new sound emerged. A soft, clear, impossibly beautiful melody. It wasn't the terrifying hum or the enraged shriek. It was the original Siren's song, pure and unadulterated. A lullaby of exquisite sorrow and irresistible longing. It was the sound that had lured countless souls to their doom, stripped bare of its malevolent overlay, revealing its true seductive power. It was calling to me, not with anger, but with an agonizing, tender appeal, promising peace, release, an end to all struggle. It filled my mind, bypassing my ears, resonating directly with the deepest, most vulnerable parts of my soul. My muscles relaxed, my grip on the wrench loosened. A profound weariness washed over me, a desire to simply lie down, to close my eyes, and let the beautiful sound carry me away. The green entity, though wounded, seemed to feed on this new, pure sound, its form stabilizing, its tendrils reaching out not with aggression, but with an almost gentle invitation. Come, join us. The thought whispered in my mind carried on the wings of the beautiful, deadly melody. Release your pain, become one. My eyes began to droop. The wrench slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud that was swallowed by the enchanting song. I felt myself swaying, drawn irresistibly towards the glowing crack, towards the source of that impossibly sweet sound. My fear was replaced by a serene acceptance, a profound sense of belonging. The lighthouse had always called to me, hadn't it? Perhaps this was my destiny, to finally answer, to finally be at peace. My hand reached out, trembling, towards the green light, towards the beautiful, deadly song that promised an end to everything. I was so tired, so very, very tired. My hand reached out, trembling, towards the green light, towards the beautiful, deadly song that promised an end to everything. I was so tired, so very, very tired. The light pulsed, almost inviting my touch, its warmth a phantom caress on my skin. The melody swelled, enveloping me, pulling me into its comforting, all-consuming embrace. I closed my eyes, ready to let go, ready to dissolve into the shimmering emerald glow. Then a flicker. Not in the light, but in the song itself. A subtle, almost imperceptible discord, like a single out-of-tune note in a perfect symphony. It was fleeting, easily dismissed, but it was there. And with it, a whisper. Not part of the song, but within it. A faint, distant echo, like a voice calling from across an impossible chasm. Michael. The whisper was barely audible. A ghost of a sound, but it was enough. It wasn't the siren. It was human. Familiar. Jessica. My eyes snapped open. The green light still pulsed, the song still sang, but now it felt different. The comfort had a hollow resonance. The beauty a deceptive sheen. The whisper repeated, clearer this time, urgent, laced with a fear that wasn't my own. Michael, don't. It was her voice. Unmistakably. Not the siren's mimicry, but Jessica's. My Jessica. The one I loved. The one I was here for. A jolt like an electric shock ripped through me. This wasn't peace. This wasn't an end. This was a trap. A beautiful, deadly deception designed to lure the broken, the lost, the weary into oblivion. And Jessica wasn't calling me to join her in that oblivion. She was warning me away from it. She was still fighting. Still somewhere. My hand, which had been reaching out, froze an inch from the swirling green light. The trance shattered, replaced by a sudden fierce surge of adrenaline and a burning righteous anger. How dare it? How dare this thing, whatever it was, try to take me, try to make me forget her, try to make me give up when she was still out there. My fingers curled into a fist, pulling back sharply from the light. The warmth vanished, replaced by the biting cold of the lighthouse air. The song, though still playing, now grated on my ears, its sweetness turning cloying, its seduction feeling like a sneering mockery. I swayed, the sudden shift in my mental state making me dizzy, but I caught myself, leaning heavily against the cold, damp stone of the lighthouse wall. My heart pounded, not with despair, but with a renewed, desperate resolve. I wasn't here to surrender. I was here to find her. And if this light, this song, was what had taken her, then I would tear this lighthouse apart stone by stone until I understood its secrets. I stared at the green light, no longer with longing, but with a cold, analytical gaze. It wasn't emanating from the lamp mechanism itself, not in the traditional sense. It seemed to flow from the very air around the central column, coalescing, strengthening, and then pulsing outwards. And the sound was everywhere, yet nowhere. It was a vibration in the air, in the stone, in my very bones, amplified by the lighthouse's unique acoustics. This platform, the very top of the lighthouse, was a stage, a place of final temptation. But the source, the true heart of this anomaly, had to be deeper. It had to be below. My gaze dropped to the winding spiral staircase that descended into the darkness. Each step was a challenge, worn smooth by decades, perhaps centuries of unseen feet. The railing was cold, rusted iron. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the air thick with the smell of salt, decay, and something else, something metallic and ancient. My legs ached, my head throbbed, and the phantom pain from my encounter with David earlier still flared in my ribs. But the whisper of Jessica's voice, the memory of her warning, fueled me. I wouldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. I gripped the railing, testing its stability, and began my descent. Each step creaked under my weight, echoing eerily in the vast, empty cylinder of the lighthouse. The green light above gradually diminished, casting longer, distorted shadows as I moved further from its direct influence. The song, however, didn't fade. If anything, it seemed to shift, becoming less ethereal and more mechanical. A low hum beneath the melody, a rhythmic thrum that vibrated through the stone. The lighthouse grew colder, the air heavier as I spiraled downwards. The windows, which had offered glimpses of the raging storm and distant, angry sea, became fewer and further between, until they vanished altogether, replaced by solid, impenetrable stone. The only light now came from my phone's dying flashlight beam, which flickered precariously, threatening to give out at any moment. I passed what looked like old living quarters, now stripped bare, dust motes dancing in the weak light. A rusted bed frame, a collapsed wooden table, a single broken porcelain cup on the floor. Signs of lives once lived here, abruptly abandoned. Had they too succumbed to the song? Or had they simply fled, driven mad by its incessant call? Further down, the walls became slick with damp, the air thick with the smell of brine and mildew. Water dripped steadily from somewhere above, echoing like slow, deliberate footsteps in the silence. The spiral staircase felt endless, a descent into the very bowels of the earth. My hand, still gripping the railing, felt a strange texture beneath the rust, a series of shallow, almost imperceptible grooves. I paused, shining my light closer. They weren't natural. They were symbols, etched into the iron, repeating over and over again, angular, interlocking shapes that I couldn't decipher, but which sent a shiver down my spine. They looked ancient, alien. The hum beneath the song grew louder, more distinct, as I continued my descent. It was a low, resonant thrum, like a giant unseen engine churning deep within the lighthouse. I pressed on, my muscles protesting, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Each step was a conscious effort, a battle against exhaustion and the overwhelming sense of dread that now permeated the air. Finally, the staircase ended abruptly, opening into a vast, circular chamber at the very base of the lighthouse. This wasn't a living space. This was something else entirely. The air here was even colder, thick with a strange metallic tang. The walls were no longer smooth stone but rough, unhewn rock, suggesting I was now below ground level, burrowing into the very foundation of the island itself. And here the green light was intense, not diffused and ethereal like at the top, but concentrated, focused. It emanated from the center of the chamber, from a structure that defied explanation. It wasn't a lamp. It wasn't a projector. It was a massive cylindrical device, perhaps 10 feet tall and 6 feet wide, made of some dark, obsidian-like material that seemed to absorb all other light. Strange, intricate conduits glowing with the same eerie green snaked across its surface, connecting to a series of smaller, pulsating nodes embedded in the rock walls. The entire chamber vibrated with the low thrumming I had heard, a sound that seemed to originate from the heart of this colossal machine. This was it. This was the source. The engine of the Siren's song. The air around the device shimmered with heat, despite the chamber's overall coldness. I could feel the energy radiating from it, a powerful, almost tangible force that pressed in on me, making my teeth ache. The green light wasn't just light. It was an active force, a wave of energy that seemed to manipulate the very air, creating the mesmerizing, deadly melody. As I cautiously approached the device, my flashlight beam sweeping across the chamber, I noticed something else. Scattered around the base of the machine, amidst the damp earth and ancient rock, were artifacts. Not ancient relics, but relatively recent items. A tattered fisherman's cap, its wool faded and salt-stained. A child's small leather shoe. A woman's silver locket, tarnished with age, lying half-buried in the dirt. And among them, glinting faintly in the green light, was an object that made my blood run cold. It was a small, ornate compass, its brass casing dulled by the sea air. But what truly caught my eye wasn't the compass itself, but the intricate engraving on its lid. A stylized anchor, entwined with a delicate, flowing script. It was the same anchor and script I had seen on the old, weathered logbook in David's office. The logbook that belonged to the sea serpent, the ship Jessica had gone out on. And beside the compass, partially obscured by a fallen piece of rock, was something else. A small waterlogged journal. Its cover was dark, almost black, but I could make out faded gold lettering on its spine. S. Miller. Sarah Miller. The lighthouse keeper's daughter. The girl who had vanished decades ago, whose story was so eerily similar to Jessica's. My hands trembled as I reached for the journal, my heart hammering against my ribs. The green light pulsed, the song swelled, but now it felt less like a seduction and more like a warning. I had found the heart of the mystery, and it was far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The journal, bound in weathered leather, felt heavy in my hands, its pages brittle with age. My fingers trembled as I fumbled with the clasp, the green light outside intensifying, casting an eerie glow through the grimy windows of the keeper's room. The song, once a distant melody, now vibrated through the very stones of the lighthouse, a low hum that seemed to resonate deep within my skull. It felt like the lighthouse itself was breathing, alive, and the journal was its beating heart. I forced myself to breathe, to focus. This was it. The answers. The first few entries were mundane, typical observations of a lighthouse keeper named Thomas Miller from the late 1800s. Weather patterns, supply deliveries, repairs. But then a shift. A growing unease crept into his meticulous handwriting. Asterisk October 17, 1892 asterisk, strange lights observed tonight. Greenish hue, emanating from the sea, not the sky. Accompanied by a low thrumming. Unsettling. Dismissed it as phosphorescence, but it felt deliberate. Asterisk November 3, 1892 asterisk, the sound persists. A deep hum, sometimes rising to a melodic tone. My assistant, young Peter, claims he hears voices in it. Nonsense, I told him. But I find myself listening more intently each night. The green light pulses with the sound. Asterisk December 1st, 1892 asterisk, Peter is gone. Disappeared from his bunk. No note, no struggle. Only the faint scent of salt and something else. Something metallic yet organic. The green light was exceptionally bright last night. The song, it was beautiful, yet terrifying. I find myself drawn to the window, staring into the emerald glow. My blood ran cold. Peter. Just like David. Just like Emily. The entries grew more erratic, the handwriting less precise. Thomas was losing his grip. Asterisk January 15th, 1893 asterisk, it calls. Not with words but with feeling. A promise of understanding, of ultimate peace. It emanates from the depths, from the abyssal trench just beyond the reef. The lighthouse, it seems, acts as a conduit. Its beacon, meant to warn, now amplifies the other's call. Asterisk February 28, 1893 asterisk, I've been studying the old charts. There's an anomaly, a convergence of subterranean currents directly beneath this rock. And the rock itself, it's not entirely granite. There are veins of something else, something smooth and dark, almost crystalline. It hums when the green light is strongest. He was describing the very rock I stood on, the foundation of the lighthouse, the crystalline veins. Could they be what amplified the siren's song? March 10, 1893 I understand now. It is not a creature of flesh and blood, not as we know it. It is an entity of conscious energy, ancient, perhaps primordial. It exists within the deep, feeding on what? Curiosity, mental energy. It lures, it beckons, and those who answer are drawn into its embrace. It absorbs them, not destroys. It takes their consciousness, their essence, adding it to its own vast, growing awareness. The green light is its eye, its lure. The song, its voice, its hypnotic command. My breath hitched. An entity of conscious energy. It absorbed people. This wasn't a legend, it was a cosmic horror, a parasitic intelligence. April 5, 1893 I have tried to resist. I have tied myself to my bed, jammed the windows, but the song, it seeps through. It promises knowledge, enlightenment beyond human comprehension. It shows me visions of forgotten stars, of truths that shatter the mind. I saw Peter and others. They are not gone. They are part of it. Their minds merged, their consciousnesses woven into its tapestry. They are not suffering. They are at peace. But it is not a human peace. A cold dread spread through me, far worse than any fear of death. To be absorbed, to lose oneself, to become merely a thread in a monstrous alien consciousness. That was the true terror. May 1st, 1893 It wants me. It wants my understanding, my observations. It has shown me its hunger. It is growing. The lighthouse, this ancient stone structure, acts as a focusing lens, a beacon drawing souls from the shore. The green light is not just a signal. It is a resonance frequency, tuned to the human brain. It opens a pathway. Once you hear the song, once you see the light, you are marked. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the sea air. I had heard the song. I had seen the light. I was marked. The final entries were increasingly fragmented, scrawled in a hand that barely resembled the meticulous script from the beginning. May 12, 1893 The green light is everywhere. It is in my eyes, in my mind. The song, it is a symphony of 1,000 voices, Peter's, others, they call to me. They tell me to come, to join, to be one. May 15, 1893 I can feel its presence, a vast mind, ancient and patient. It reaches for me. I can no longer fight. The knowledge, it is too tempting. The peace, it is too profound. I see the truth. The world is but a dream. And this is awakening. The final page was blank, save for a single shaky symbol drawn in what looked like dried ink. A swirling spiral, reminiscent of an eye or a vortex. And then nothing. Thomas Miller had gone the way of Peter, David, and Emily. He had answered the siren's call. I slammed the journal shut, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence that followed the fading of the green light. For a moment, the song seemed to recede, as if the entity itself had paused, waiting for my reaction. My mind reeled. An ancient, parasitic consciousness, amplifying its lure through the lighthouse, drawing people into its collective. It wasn't a ghost, not a monster in the traditional sense. It was something far more insidious, something that preyed on the very essence of being. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. I was trapped in this crumbling tower, surrounded by the very mechanism designed to lure me to my doom. The air felt heavy, charged with unseen energy. I looked down at my hands, at the journal, then up at the lantern room above. The green light was gone, but I knew it would return. The song was muted, but I could still feel its echo in my bones. I had to get out. I had to warn someone. But who would believe me? A story of a sentient psychic entity beneath the sea, absorbing human consciousness? They'd locked me up in a padded cell. A low creak from the spiral staircase behind me made me jump. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Nothing. Just the wind whistling through a broken pane, or so I hoped. My imagination, now supercharged by Thomas's chilling account, was playing tricks on me. But then a faint, almost imperceptible hum started again, deep within the lighthouse structure. It wasn't the full siren's song, not yet. It was a prelude, a subtle vibration that I could feel in the soles of my feet. The crystalline veins Thomas had mentioned, they were awakening. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the journal. This wasn't just about escaping. This was about stopping it. If the lighthouse was its conduit, its amplifier, then perhaps the lighthouse could also be its weakness. If I could disable the mechanism, if I could sever its connection to the entity. But how? Thomas, with all his understanding, had been absorbed. What chance did I have? A flicker of green light danced across the interior of the lantern room, a ghostly reflection from somewhere outside. It wasn't full-blown yet, but it was testing, probing. The entity knew I was here. It knew I had read the journal. It was aware. I rushed to the window, peering out into the twilight. The sea below was a churning black mass, reflecting the last slivers of the dying sun. And then I saw it. Far out, where the abyssal trench was marked on Thomas's charts, a faint, pulsing emerald glow beneath the surface. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The source. The entity was vast, ancient, patient, and it was waking up. My mind raced, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The lighthouse keeper's room, what else could be here? Thomas must have tried something, left a clue, a weapon. I scanned the small, cluttered room, my flashlight beam dancing over dusty shelves filled with old logbooks, rusted tools, and forgotten nautical instruments. Then my eyes landed on a small, wooden box tucked away beneath a stack of old charts. It was unmarked, but something about its placement, its deliberate concealment, caught my attention. I pulled it out, my fingers fumbling with the corroded latch. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a peculiar device. It was intricate, made of brass and copper, with a series of small, precisely cut crystal lenses arranged around a central, larger crystal. Wires, insulated with ancient cloth, trailed from it, connecting to a small hand-crank generator. It looked like some archaic scientific instrument, perhaps a prototype. Beside it lay a single yellowed note, written in Thomas's shaky hand, but dated after his last journal entry. This was an addendum, a final desperate act. The note read, "Asterisk, they call it the harmonizer. A fool's errand," my colleagues said. "A device to disrupt resonant frequencies. I built it to counter the siren's song, to break its hold. It requires immense power and precise tuning. If I fail, if I am taken, use it." Pointed at the source, at the green light. "It may not destroy, but it may sever. It is our only hope. The lighthouse itself is the key. Its power source, its original lens. They can be repurposed." Asterisk. A harmonizer. A device to disrupt resonant frequencies. Thomas had built a weapon, and he believed it could work. My gaze flickered from the device to the original, massive Fresnel lens in the lantern room above, then back to the hand-crank generator connected to the harmonizer. Immense power. The lighthouse's own power, he said. The original lens. I understood. The lighthouse, designed to project light, could be repurposed to project a counterfrequency. The harmonizer was the key, the lens the amplifier, and the entity the target. The hum intensified, no longer subtle, but a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the floorboards, up my legs, into my chest. The green light outside pulsed, stronger this time, painting the walls of the keeper's room in sickly emerald. The siren's song began to swell, a low, hypnotic chorus that seemed to whisper my name, promising secrets, offering peace. It was time. Time to face the music. Time to use Thomas Miller's last, desperate hope. I grabbed the harmonizer, its brass cold and heavy in my hands, and headed for the spiral staircase, my heart pounding a furious rhythm against the rising tide of the siren's song. The final confrontation was at hand. The spiral staircase became a tunnel of sound, each step upward plunging me deeper into the siren's hypnotic embrace. It no longer felt like a melody but a physical force, pressing against my eardrums, vibrating through my bones, attempting to unravel my very will. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with an unseen energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Patches of the strange, phosphorescent moss glowed brighter on the stone walls, pulsing in time with the escalating song, like the beating heart of the tower itself. My head swam, a dizzying cocktail of fear and primal instinct. I clutched the harmonizer, its cold brass a grounding anchor in the rising tide of sensory overload. Miller's scrawled notes flashed in my mind. Asterisk frequency counter. Disrupt the resonant field. Critical for neutralization. Asterisk, he hadn't just built a weapon. He'd built a desperate prayer. Finally, I burst through the last opening, onto the observation deck at the very top. The wind howled through the broken panes, but it was the least of the sounds. The siren song here was deafening, a raw, untamed shriek that tore at my sanity. And then I saw it. It wasn't a woman. Not a mythical creature of flesh and blood. It was a pulsating, ethereal construct of light and sound, coalescing from the very air above the shattered lantern room. Imagine a vast, luminous jellyfish, but made of pure energy, its tendrils not of matter but of shimmering, pulsating light that stretched downwards, merging with the strange, bioluminescent flora that now completely engulfed the inner mechanics of the lighthouse. Where the lamp once stood, a central core pulsed with an intense, otherworldly blue, a light that seemed to draw the very essence from the air, from the sea, from me. The tendrils, like roots of pure light, burrowed into the stone, into the metal, connecting it to the entire tower, to the island itself. And from this core the song emanated, a multi-layered symphony of despair and allure that promised everything and offered nothing but oblivion. It was the source, the heart of the anomaly, a living bioluminescent frequency generator. My vision blurred, my knees threatened to buckle. The creature, if you could even call it that, sensed my presence. The blue core pulsed faster, and the song intensified, focusing its immense power directly on me. It felt like my brain was being squeezed, my thoughts ripped apart. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, forcing myself to remember Miller, Jessica, the others. I had to fight. With a guttural cry, I lifted the harmonizer. It was heavy, awkward, but its purpose was clear. I aimed its brass cone towards the pulsating heart of the entity. Miller's instructions were simple. Asterisk, find the resonant frequency. Overload it. Disrupt the core. Asterisk, there was a small dial on the side, marked with obscure symbols and a single glowing indicator light. It was set to a specific frequency, presumably the one Miller had painstakingly calculated. My thumb fumbled for the trigger, a small worn button on the grip. The creature reacted, its luminous tendrils writhing, a high-pitched whine joining the siren's song, like a warning, a desperate defense. It was trying to overwhelm me before I could act. My hands shook so violently I thought I might drop the device. But I remembered the vacant stares of the missing, the terror in Jessica's eyes, the haunted look in Miller's. This was for them. I pressed the button. A low hum vibrated through the harmonizer, growing into a deep, resonant thrum. The indicator light flared an angry red. A wave of raw, anti-sound erupted from the device, a focused, powerful frequency that slammed into the siren's song. It wasn't a sound I could hear with my ears, not fully, but a pressure, a counter-vibration that hit the air like a physical blow. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The siren's song, which had been a coherent, albeit terrifying melody, shattered into a cacophony of screeching static. The luminous tendrils of the entity recoiled, twitching like severed nerves. The central blue core flickered erratically, dimming and brightening in rapid succession, like a dying star. The creature shrieked, a sound that wasn't a song but a pure, unadulterated cry of pain and rage. The entire lighthouse shuddered. Cracks spiderwebbed across the remaining glass of the lantern room. The strange moss on the walls began to wither, curling inward, its phosphorescence fading. I kept the trigger pressed, my arm aching, my entire body rattling with the opposing frequencies. The air smelled of ozone and something acrid like burnt sugar. The entity fought back, its light flaring with renewed intensity, trying to push through the harmonizer's disruptive field. It was a battle of pure frequency, a silent war of vibrations. My nose began to bleed, a warm trickle against my lips. My vision swam again, but I held fast, my gaze locked on the flickering blue core. Miller's notes had warned of the backlash, the entity's desperate struggle. He'd said, asterisk, maintain the frequency. Do not waver. The field must collapse. Asterisk. The creature's form began to distort, its elegant jellyfish-like shape unraveling. The tendrils thinned, becoming translucent, then vanishing into wisps of light. The central blue core, once so vibrant and commanding, shrank, its pulsing becoming weaker, more sporadic. The piercing shriek dwindled into a dying gasp, replaced by the grating static of the harmonizer. And then, with one final, shuddering surge of energy that felt like an electric shock through my entire body, the blue core imploded inward, collapsing into nothingness. The light vanished. The sound ceased. Silence. Absolute, profound, ringing silence. The sudden absence of the siren's song was more shocking than its presence. My ears ached, my head pounded, but the crushing weight on my mind was gone. I stumbled back, releasing the harmonizer, which clattered to the stone floor. It felt impossibly heavy now, drained of its purpose. I gasped for air, collapsing against the cold, rough wall of the lighthouse, my legs giving out beneath me. The wind howled freely through the broken lantern room, unimpeded by any other sound. The strange phosphorescent moss on the walls was now completely withered, black and brittle like dead leaves. The air, once heavy and charged, felt clean, crisp, and cold. It was over. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself up. The sun was beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The ocean below, no longer glowing with an unnatural light, stretched out in its familiar, deep blue. The lighthouse, once a beacon of dread, was now just an old derelict structure. I looked at the spot where the entity had been. Nothing remained but the shattered remnants of the lantern and a faint, lingering scent of ozone. The strange flora that had infested the tower was gone, dissolved or withered into ash. I spent the next few hours simply sitting there, watching the sunrise, letting the silence wash over me, trying to process the impossible truth of what I had just witnessed and done. When I finally descended the spiral staircase, the journey felt different. The air was lighter, the stone steps merely cold and hard, not humming with unseen energy. Back in Miller's research room, the journals and notes now made chilling sense. The Siren wasn't a mythological beast, but an undiscovered, deep-sea bioluminescent organism. Miller had theorized it thrived on specific resonant frequencies, using them to attract and disorient prey, or in this case, humans drawn by an inexplicable pull. Its natural habitat was likely the abyssal trenches, but a rare seismic event, or perhaps a rogue current, had dislodged a fragment, bringing it to the surface, where it found a new, powerful amplifier in the lighthouse's unique structure and the surrounding mineral deposits. It wasn't malice Miller had written, but instinct, a biological imperative to survive and reproduce, inadvertently causing destruction when interacting with our world. The disappearances, the strange plant life, the glowing water, all symptoms of its presence, its growth, and its parasitic relationship with the environment. Miller had dedicated his life and ultimately sacrificed it, not to destroy a monster, but to neutralize an ecological anomaly, a natural force that posed an existential threat to anyone who ventured too close. His harmonizer was a testament to his genius and his desperate hope. I knew I couldn't simply walk away and pretend this never happened. The world needed to know, but how? How do you explain an ethereal, frequency-based deep-sea organism that amplifies itself through a lighthouse to lure people to their doom? It sounded like madness. I spent another day meticulously copying Miller's most crucial notes, diagramming the harmonizer, documenting everything I could. I packed a small bag with these documents, leaving the original journals and the harmonizer itself behind. The lighthouse, I decided, had to be sealed. Not just abandoned, but officially condemned, its secrets buried with it. Before I left the island for good, I stood at the edge of the cliff, looking back at the lighthouse. It stood stark against the setting sun, a silent sentinel once more. The strange glow was gone from the water, the air clear. It looked peaceful, almost inviting. But I knew its true nature, the terrifying truth hidden beneath its weathered facade. The siren's song was silenced, but the echo of its power, the chilling realization of what lies hidden beneath the familiar surface of our world, would forever resonate within me. The ocean, vast and mysterious, held countless secrets, and I had merely glimpsed one of its most terrifying. The world was far stranger, far more dangerous, and infinitely more beautiful than I had ever dared to imagine. And sometimes the greatest mysteries are not found in ancient legends, but in the silent, unseen forces that shape the very fabric of our reality, waiting to be awakened.